The wreckage burned silver against crimson sand. Commander Alexei Voronov dragged himself from the smoking hull of his diplomatic vessel, blood trickling down his temple. Through blurred vision, he saw them, towering figures in obsidian armor, weapons raised. He'd failed. The human delegation's attempt to negotiate safe passage through the sovereign expanse had ended in an ambush. Now he'd die on some forgotten moon, another casualty of Empress Seraphine Kelvar's ruthless domain. Stunned. The voice cut through the air like a blade wrapped in velvet. Alexei looked up. She descended from a hovering platform, and reality itself seemed to bend around her. 8 feet of otherworldly elegance, skin like polished moonstone, eyes the color of dying stars. The Eternal Empress, ruler of 300 systems, the woman who'd conquered half the known galaxy without mercy. "You're small," she observed, circling him. "Fragile. Your species lives, 80 cycles if fortunate." "Long enough to know tyranny when I see it," Alexei spat, forcing himself upright despite his injuries. Silence. Her guards tensed. Nobody spoke to the Empress like that. Nobody who wanted to continue breathing. But Seraphine laughed, a sound that hadn't echoed through her halls in centuries. "Tyranny? I brought order to chaos. Unity to a fractured cosmos." "You brought subjugation." Alexei met those ancient eyes without flinching. "There's a difference between unity and submission, Your Majesty." Something flickered across her perfect features. Surprise? Curiosity? She raised one elegant hand, stopping her guards from executing him on the spot. "Bring him to the palace. I wish to understand what makes humans believe their brief flicker of existence grants them such audacity." The cell was opulent, more guest quarters than prison. Alexei spent 3 days recovering before she visited him alone. Guards dismissed with a wave. "Tell me," Seraphine said, settling onto a crystalline chair that materialized from the floor, "what do you see when you look at the stars?" "Hope," he answered honestly. "Possibility. Freedom. I see property, territory, resources to maintain order." "Then you've forgotten what it means to simply be." She leaned forward, genuinely intrigued. "You don't fear me?" "I do," Alexei admitted. "But I fear living without purpose more. What's the point of survival if you're just existing in someone else's design?" For the first time in her 1,000-year reign, Empress Seraphine Kelvar felt something crack in the impenetrable fortress she'd built around herself. This human, this fleeting spark of life, saw not her power, or her throne, or her terrible reputation. He saw her. "Come," she said softly, "I want to show you something." She led him to a private observatory where the nebula of a dying star painted the cosmos in shades of gold and crimson. They stood in silence, watching creation and destruction dance together in the void. "Beautiful," Alexei whispered. Seraphine's hand found his, her cool skin against his warmth. "Yes," she agreed, though she was no longer looking at the stars. Weeks became months. What began as interrogation evolved into conversation, then confession. Seraphine found herself dismissing court obligations to spend evenings in that observatory with Alexei. "Tell me about Earth," she'd command, though it sounded more like a request. He'd describe oceans he'd swum in as a child, mountains he'd climbed, the way rain smelled on summer pavement. "It sounds chaotic," she mused one evening. "It's alive." Alexei turned to her, studying the way starlight caught in her silver hair. "When did you last do something just because it made you happy?" The question hung between them like a challenge. Seraphine stood abruptly, and for a moment, Alexei thought he'd overstepped. Instead, she held out her hand. "Dance with me." "There's no music." "Then we'll make our own." They moved together in the silent observatory, her teaching him the ancient courtship dances of her people, him pulling her into the clumsy, joyful movements of human celebration. When she laughed, truly laughed, it was like witnessing a star being born. The moment shifted. Their movements slowed. Alexi's hand slid to her waist, feeling the warmth beneath her ethereal exterior. Seraphine's breath caught. Something she hadn't needed to do in centuries, yet her body remembered the gesture of intimacy. "We shouldn't," she whispered, even as she leaned closer. "I know." His thumb traced her jawline. "You're an empress. I'm nobody." "No." Her eyes searched his face with desperate intensity. "You're the only person in a millennium who's seen me as something more than a crown." Their first kiss tasted like rebellion, like freedom. Her lips were softer than he'd imagined, and the way she sighed against his mouth made him forget every reason this was impossible. They made love on cushions beneath the stars, and Seraphine discovered that her immortal body could still tremble, still ache with want, still feel alive. Alexei mapped every inch of her luminous skin with reverent touches, and she learned that vulnerability wasn't weakness. It was the most powerful thing she'd ever experienced. Afterward, wrapped in silk sheets while galaxies wheeled overhead, Seraphine traced patterns on his chest. "My people," she began softly, "we feel everything more intensely than yours. Love especially. When we bond, it's absolute." "How absolute?" She met his eyes. "I would give up the entire galaxy for you, human." Alexei smiled, pulling her closer. "You don't have to. We can find a way." But even as he said it, they both knew the truth. In her universe, there was no compromise, only conquest or surrender. And for the first time, Empress Seraphine Kelvar understood what it meant to have something worth surrendering for. The High Council discovered them during the Festival of Stars, when Seraphine had grown careless with joy. General Kairos himself burst into her private chambers, finding the Empress wrapped in the arms of a human, their naked bodies intertwined beneath sheets that still carried the heat of passion. Majesty. Horror and rage warred in his voice. What treason is this? Seraphine rose with deadly grace, conjuring robes of shadow around herself. "Leave us!" "I will not! You've been compromised, corrupted by this creature." "Choose your next words carefully, General." But the damage was done. Within hours, the entire inner court gathered in the throne room, their faces carved from stone in judgment. Alexei stood beside Seraphine, refusing her order to hide, his hand finding hers despite the scandal it created. "The law is clear," Counselor Vexira declared, her voice sharp as broken glass. "Attachment to lesser species is forbidden. It weakens the throne, threatens stability. The human must die, and your majesty must undergo purification rites." "No." Seraphine's voice echoed through the crystalline halls. "This is not a request, Majesty. This is law. Your law, written when you established the Empire. No exceptions, no mercy." Seraphine looked at the faces surrounding her, beings she'd elevated, empowered, made into extensions of her will. They stared back with iron conviction, ready to execute the man she loved to preserve her reign. "You're right," she said quietly. "The law is clear." Relief flickered across the council's faces. Alexei's hand tightened on hers, his jaw set for the inevitable. "Which is why," Seraphine continued, her voice growing stronger, "I hereby dissolve the High Council, effective immediately." Gasps erupted. Vexira stepped forward, fury twisting her elegant features. "You cannot—" "I am the Eternal Empress. I can." Seraphine raised her free hand, and holographic displays bloomed throughout the chamber. "I am releasing all conquered territories. Every system will have 30 cycles to establish independent governance. All war fleets are to stand down and decommission. The sovereign expanse is no more." "Madness!" General Kairos roared. 3 centuries of conquest." 3 centuries of loneliness, Seraphine countered, her voice breaking. "Of maintaining an order I no longer believe in. I built an empire thinking power would fill the emptiness inside me, but it only made the void deeper. She turned to Alexei, tears, impossible, precious tears, streaming down her luminous face. You showed me what I'd forgotten, that existing isn't the same as living, that connection matters more than control. Majesty, please, Counselor Thren pleaded, his ancient voice shaking. Think of the chaos, the power vacuum. Without your governance, the galaxy will tear itself apart. Perhaps. Seraphine stepped down from her throne for the last time. Or perhaps they'll discover what my reign prevented them from finding. Their own strength, their own purpose. She removed her crown, that terrible, beautiful symbol of absolute authority, and placed it on the empty throne. I choose love over domination. The announcement went out on every frequency, every channel, every holographic network spanning 300 systems. Billions watched as Empress Seraphine Kelvar stood before them, no longer wearing the regalia of power, her hand clasped with a human's. For a millennium I have ruled you, she began, her voice carrying across the stars. I told myself it was for the greater good, that my iron fist brought stability, peace, order. Alexei stood beside her, knowing his face was being broadcast to countless worlds, making him either the galaxy's greatest villain or its most unlikely revolutionary. But I was wrong, Seraphine continued. True peace cannot be imposed. Real order cannot be maintained through fear. I robbed you of choice, of freedom, of the messy, beautiful chaos that makes life worth living. On the core worlds, riots erupted. On conquered planets, celebrations began. In the depths of space, warlords who'd been suppressed for centuries reached for weapons they'd hidden away. I release you from my rule. All of you, govern yourselves. Find your own paths, make your own mistakes, live your own lives. Why? Someone shouted from the crowd gathered outside the palace. Why throw away everything for him? Seraphine smiled. A real smile, not the practiced expression of a ruler, but the genuine joy of a woman in love. Because he reminded me that power without purpose is just prison. That being feared isn't the same as being loved. That existing for 1,000 years means nothing compared to truly living for even a single moment. She pulled Alexei closer, kissing him before the entire galaxy, claiming her choice with defiant tenderness. I am Seraphine, no longer Empress, no longer eternal, just myself, and that is enough. The holographic feed cut out. Chaos erupted across the expanse. Some systems immediately declaring independence, others begging her to reconsider, still others preparing for the wars they've been craving. In the palace, the former council stood stunned. General Kairos approached slowly, his hand on his weapon. You've doomed us all, he said quietly. And for what? A human who will die in the blink of your immortal eye? Perhaps, Seraphine agreed, but I'll spend every moment of his life truly living, rather than an eternity merely existing. She turned to Alexei. Ready? He grinned despite everything. Despite the galaxy crumbling, despite knowing they'd be hunted, despite the impossible odds. Always. They walked out of the throne room together, leaving behind an empire, a legacy, and 1,000 years of absolute power. For love. The ship was small, barely large enough for two. Nothing like the battlecruisers that had once carried Seraphine across the stars. Alexei piloted them away from the palace world as it erupted into chaos behind them, former subjects tearing down monuments to their fallen empress. Regrets? He asked quietly. Seraphine watched her empire fracture through the viewport, systems winking out as they declared independence or plunged into civil war. Ask me when you're old and gray, and I'm still this. Hey. He cupped her face, making her look at him. We'll figure it out, together. She kissed him deeply, desperately, knowing he was right, but also terrified of the day his mortal body would fail, leaving her with centuries of memory and grief. They made love in the cramped ship's quarters, finding joy in the closeness, the vulnerability, the beautifully human messiness of tangled limbs and racing hearts. Afterward, Seraphine lay against his chest, listening to his heartbeat, that finite, precious rhythm. "Where should we go?" she whispered. "Anywhere. Everywhere. Earth, you've never seen an ocean." "I'd like that." But 3 days into their journey, the alarm screamed. Alexei rushed to the controls as a massive warship materialized from warp space. Not one of Seraphine's, something older, darker. "What the hell?" "No!" Seraphine's face went pale. "The Vorthak Dominion." "Who?" "The empire I conquered 5 centuries ago. I kept them suppressed, scattered, without my fleets holding them back." The warship's weapons powered up. A transmission crackled through. "Seraphine Kelvar, you destroyed the only thing powerful enough to contain us. For that, we thank you. Your galaxy will burn beautifully." Alexei grabbed the controls, but their tiny vessel had no weapons, no shields capable of withstanding the Dominion's firepower. Seraphine closed her eyes, feeling the weight of her choice. She'd released 300 systems, thinking she was granting them freedom. Instead, she'd removed the only barrier protecting them from something far worse than her benevolent tyranny. "I'm sorry," she whispered, to all those lives, trillions of souls she'd just condemned. "I thought—" "You thought love was enough," the Dominion commander laughed. "How human of you. Now watch your precious galaxy die." The warship opened fire, not at them, but at the nearest inhabited system. Seraphine watched helplessly as a planet she'd once ruled blazed and went dark. Alexei took her hand. "We can fix this." "How? I have no army, no authority, no power." "You have something better." He turned her to face him. "You have the truth. You showed them that even absolute power can choose differently, that even empires can end. So let's show them what comes next. Not more domination, but something new, something better." Seraphine looked at this fragile human who changed everything, whose mortal courage had toppled an empire, who believed in hope even as darkness descended. "Together?" she asked. "Always." As the Dominion warship prepared another devastating strike, Seraphine began transmitting on every frequency, her voice reaching across the splintered systems. "This is Seraphine. I gave you freedom, and now that freedom is threatened. I cannot save you, but you can save yourselves. Unite. Not under a ruler, but as equals. Not through conquest, but through choice. Show the Dominion that the galaxy I freed is stronger than the empire I built." She didn't know if anyone would listen. She didn't know if love had been enough or if she'd doomed everything. But as Alexei's hand tightened on hers and their small ship dove toward an uncertain future, Seraphine understood one truth. She would rather face the apocalypse she'd possibly created with him beside her than rule a galaxy alone forever. Some would call it the greatest love story ever told. Others would call it the worst mistake in galactic history. Perhaps it was both. The end?